Imagine walking into a church on what should be the saddest day of your life. The wooden pews are filled with people dressed in black. Flowers surround a mahogany coffin. The organ plays softly in the background. A priest in white robes stands at the altar, his hands folded, ready to say the final goodbye. But in just a few seconds, everything changes forever. The priest is about to speak the closing prayer when a voice pierces through the silence. A barefoot woman, her clothes tattered and worn, her hair uncombed, suddenly screams from the back of the church. Her voice is raw, desperate, terrified. "Stop! He's not dead! You can't bury him!" The entire room freezes. Guests gasp. Some stand up in shock. Security guards immediately move toward the woman, ready to remove her. The priest hesitates, his mouth still open. And in that moment of chaos, confusion, and disbelief, nobody knows what comes next. Who is this woman? Why would she claim that the man in that coffin is still alive? What could possibly make her risk everything to interrupt this funeral? Before we dive deeper into this unbelievable story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now let's uncover the truth that would shock the entire world. His name was Charles Beaumont, and he was everything most people dream of becoming. Born into old money, he spent his childhood in Manhattan penthouses and summers in the Hamptons. But Charles wasn't content with just inheriting wealth. He wanted to build an empire. By the age of 30, he had already made his first billion through real estate and venture capital. His face appeared on magazine covers. Business schools taught case studies about his ruthless negotiation tactics. He was known as a man who always got what he wanted, no matter the cost. Charles owned companies, properties, and influence, but success came with a price. Dozens of lawsuits followed him over the years. Employees claimed he fired them without severance. Business partners accused him of stealing their ideas. A former lover sued for emotional distress. Charles always won in court. He had the best lawyers money could buy. By the time he reached his 70s, Charles had accumulated over $3 billion. His mansion had 20 rooms, a private wine cellar worth millions, and art on the walls that museums would kill for. But behind those magnificent gates, something was changing. His health was deteriorating rapidly. He suffered from heart problems and diabetes. He was taking medications that made him weak and confused. Some people close to him noticed he wasn't the same man anymore. He seemed paranoid, worried about something. His family wanted to know what was troubling him, but Charles refused to tell them anything. On the other side of the city, in a shelter that hardly anyone paid attention to, lived a woman named Marilyn Carter. She was 68 years old, and her life had taken a devastating turn. 30 years earlier, Marilyn was a registered nurse at Metropolitan Hospital. She was educated, respected, and had her own apartment. She had worked in the cardiac unit, caring for patients who were suffering from heart disease. She was good at her job. She treated patients with dignity and compassion. But then her daughter got sick. The medical bills were astronomical. Even with insurance, Marilyn couldn't pay them all. She lost her savings. Then she lost her job because she had to miss too many shifts to care for her daughter. She lost her apartment. Eventually, she lost her daughter too. The grief was overwhelming. She fell into depression and couldn't recover. Years passed. Marilyn lived on the streets, moving between different shelters, sleeping in parks when the shelters were full. Her credentials as a nurse were long forgotten. Nobody saw her as anything but another homeless person. But Marilyn never forgot her training. She still remembered how to check a pulse. She still knew which medications did what. And sometimes when she saw other homeless people sick or injured, she would help them, even though she had nothing to give. 3 years ago, something happened that Marilyn would never forget. A man came to the shelter in the middle of the night. He was drunk and confused. The shelter volunteers didn't know what to do with him, so Marilyn stepped in. She recognized the symptoms of a heart attack. She knew this man needed a hospital immediately. She called an ambulance and stayed with him until it arrived. That man was Charles Beaumont. He had been slumming it, drinking at bars in the poor neighborhoods, trying to escape his problems. He nearly died that night, but Marilyn saved his life. 20 years later, Charles received a message. It wasn't a phone call or a letter. It was a personal visit. A lawyer came to his mansion and told him that his family was planning to have him declared mentally incompetent. They wanted control of his money. Charles was shocked and furious. He immediately changed his will. He cut his 3 children and wife out of most of his estate. He decided to leave the majority of his fortune to charity. He told the lawyer he wanted the will to be finalized as soon as possible, but Charles never got the chance to see his new plan through. One morning he woke up feeling strange. His body was heavy, his mind was foggy. He tried to get out of bed, but he couldn't move his legs. His wife called a doctor to the house. Charles was terrified. He thought he was having a stroke, but the doctor never told him what was wrong. Instead, the doctor gave him an injection. Charles felt his consciousness slipping away. He tried to speak, to ask questions, but the words wouldn't come. Everything went black. When Charles woke up again, it was 18 hours later. He was lying in his bed, but everything felt different. The room was darker. He couldn't hear any sounds from the rest of the house. He tried to move, but his body was still heavy. He realized he couldn't move his arms either. Pure fear consumed him. He was completely paralyzed. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. And then he heard voices. His wife and children were in the room next to his. He could hear them talking about his will. His wife was saying that his death would solve all their problems. His oldest son was calculating how much money they would get. His daughter was already talking about vacations. His wife said, "Did the doctor confirm it's the right dosage?" The doctor's voice responded, "He'll be gone in a few hours. We'll say it was natural causes. No autopsy needed. He's 73, overweight, history of heart disease. It's perfect." Charles realized in that moment what was happening. His family was poisoning him. What happened next was carefully orchestrated. Charles's body became completely unresponsive. His family called 911, but when they called, they said he was already dead. No paramedic tried to revive him. No hospital admitted him. No doctors examined him. The death certificate was signed by the family's personal physician, a man who had been paid substantial sums over the years. Charles's body was sent directly to the funeral home. His family insisted on a closed casket ceremony. They said it was what Charles would have wanted, though no one had ever heard him say that. When the funeral home asked if they could perform an autopsy, Charles's wife refused. She said the family wanted to preserve his body as it was. No one questioned it. Preparations for the funeral began immediately. The family wanted to bury him within 48 hours. They rushed everything. The funeral home staff found this strange. Normally, families want more time to prepare, but they didn't ask too many questions. The wake was scheduled for the next day. Journalists were kept away from the casket. Security guards stood near the coffin the entire time. Friends and business associates came to pay their respects, but they weren't allowed to see Charles's face. Everything about this funeral felt wrong, but nobody dared to speak up. The Beaumont family was too powerful, too rich, too connected. The day of the funeral arrived. The church was packed with powerful people. Senators sat in the front row. Celebrities whispered to each other. Business executives made mental notes about who was there, thinking about potential deals. The family sat in the front pew, their faces showing just the right amount of sadness, not too much to seem insincere, not too little to seem heartless. The priest stood at the altar. Everything was perfect. Everything was going exactly as planned. And then the door at the back of the church opened. A woman walked in, and the entire ceremony came to a halt. Marilyn had seen the funeral announcement in the newspaper. She recognized Charles's face immediately. She remembered that night in the shelter. She remembered his gratitude when he recovered. She remembered his tears when he thanked her. And she remembered something else. Before he left the shelter that night, Charles had pressed a small ring into her hand. It was a family heirloom, very valuable. He told her it was his thank you gift. He told her to never lose it. She had kept it all these years, hidden in a small box. When she saw his obituary, something didn't feel right. She went to the funeral home and asked questions. The staff seemed uncomfortable. They said Charles was dead and would be buried that day. Marilyn knew something was wrong. She could feel it in her bones. She rushed to the church. She waited outside until the service began, then she walked in. The moment she saw the closed casket, she knew. This wasn't right. Charles had been in perfect health when she saw him a few weeks earlier. He had come back to the shelter with donations of blankets and food for the homeless people. He looked tired, yes, but not like a dying man. When she heard the priest beginning the final prayer, she couldn't stay silent anymore. The scream came from her chest. It was raw and urgent and desperate. After security removed her from the church, Marilyn found a young journalist named Sarah Chen who was waiting outside. Sarah had come hoping to interview family members, but she had been turned away. Marilyn told her everything. She told her about Charles saving her years ago. She told her about his recent visits. She told her about the ring. Sarah was skeptical at first, but something about Marilyn's sincerity convinced her. Sarah decided to dig deeper. She started making phone calls. She requested Charles's medical records. She found that there was no hospital admittance. She found that the death certificate had been signed by the family's personal physician, not by a coroner. She discovered that Charles's will had been changed just a week before his death. Everything pointed to something sinister. Sarah published her first article questioning the circumstances of Charles's death. Within hours, police became involved. A detective named Marcus Washington decided to look into the case. He interviewed the family members, but they all had the same story. Charles died of natural causes. He had heart problems. It was expected, but Detective Washington noticed inconsistencies. The family seemed too calm. They weren't grieving properly, and most importantly, they seemed relieved. Washington decided to get a court order to exhume Charles's body. The family's lawyers fought it, but the judge ruled that an autopsy must be performed. 24 hours later, the coffin was opened, and what they found shocked everyone. Charles was alive. His body was cold, his breathing was shallow, but he was alive. He had been drugged with a combination of sedatives that mimicked death. His pulse was so faint that an untrained person wouldn't have noticed it. He had been in a state of unconsciousness for over 36 hours, but his heart was still beating. Doctors immediately rushed him to the hospital and revived him completely. Charles Beaumont opened his eyes in the intensive care unit and asked what year it was. He didn't remember anything after the injection, but he remembered his wife's voice. He remembered hearing about his will. He remembered understanding their plan to kill him and steal his money. Charles survived. The media exploded with the story. Marilyn became a national hero, the homeless woman who had saved the billionaire twice in her life. News crews camped outside the shelter where she lived. Magazine editors wanted her story. Movie producers called her lawyers asking for rights. But Marilyn refused all the attention. She just wanted to help Charles recover. The investigation revealed the full extent of the conspiracy. Charles's wife, a woman named Victoria, had been planning this for years. She had grown tired of their marriage. She wanted his money, but divorce would have left her with only half. She needed him dead. Victoria had hired a nurse to work in their home. That nurse had been slowly poisoning Charles for months, giving him medications that would weaken his heart and mind. When Charles decided to change his will, Victoria panicked. She had to act immediately. She contacted the family doctor, who agreed to help in exchange for a substantial payment. The plan was simple: give Charles an overdose of sedatives, declare him dead, get him buried, change the will, and claim his entire fortune as his widow. The children had been kept in the dark about the poisoning, but they knew their mother was doing something. They suspected foul play, but they didn't ask questions because they knew they would inherit money regardless. When Charles recovered, he decided not to press charges against his wife or children. Instead, he decided to make changes in his life. He left Victoria. He gave half of his fortune to charity, exactly as he had intended in his new will. He established a foundation in Marilyn's name to help homeless people access health care and job training. He sold his mansion and bought a smaller home. He spent his remaining years working with the foundation, helping people just like Marilyn who had fallen through society's cracks. Victoria was eventually arrested for attempted murder, but due to expensive lawyers and legal technicalities, she served only 3 years in prison. The nurse who had poisoned Charles was sentenced to 15 years. The doctor lost his license and his medical credentials. Marilyn's life changed after that day. She was no longer just another homeless woman. She became known as the person who saved a billionaire's life twice. But more importantly, she gained purpose. She started working at the foundation full-time, helping other homeless people get access to health care, job training, and housing. Within 5 years, the foundation had helped over 10,000 people get back on their feet. Charles and Marilyn became close friends. He trusted her in a way he had never trusted his own family. He would often say that Marilyn had more integrity and kindness in her little finger than all his family members combined had in their entire bodies. Years passed. Charles eventually died of natural causes at the age of 89. He left his entire remaining fortune to the foundation that bore Marilyn's name. His funeral was standing room only. Thousands of people came to pay their respects, including many of the people Marilyn had helped through the foundation. But the person who seemed most affected by his death was Marilyn herself. She had lost her best friend, her purpose, and the person who believed in her when nobody else did. Yet she continued his work. The foundation continued to grow. More people were helped. More lives were changed. Marilyn eventually wrote a book about her experience, and the proceeds went directly to the foundation. She gave talks at universities and hospitals about the importance of seeing homeless people as human beings worthy of dignity and respect. So here's a question for you. If you were in Marilyn's position, standing in that church, knowing something was terribly wrong, would you have had the courage to scream out and interrupt the funeral? Or would you have stayed silent, telling yourself it wasn't your place to interfere? And if you were Charles, trusting the people closest to you only to discover they wanted you dead, how would that change your life? How would you ever trust anyone again? This story isn't just about attempted murder or conspiracy. It's about the power of human compassion. It's about seeing people nobody else sees. It's about believing in someone when they have nothing left to lose. Marilyn had been invisible for so many years. The world had written her off as just another homeless person. But in one moment, she became visible. She became a hero, and she never let that visibility fade away. She used it to help others find their visibility too. So think about this. In your daily life, how many invisible people do you walk past? How many people are struggling silently, waiting for someone to see them? What if your simple act of kindness, your belief in someone else, could change everything? What would you do? Tell us in the comments. We're reading every single one. And if you thought this story was shocking, wait until you hear the wedding secret we uncovered in our next video. Subscribe now so you don't miss it. Thank you for watching.